I am Lola, 57 years old, and until recently, I thought my life was secure after 35 years of marriage. Then Warren left me for his younger colleague, and I lost everything in the divorce: our home, our savings, and apparently my son's respect too. When I turned to Maxwell for help, he offered me his couch while buying a luxury apartment for his mother-in-law. That stinging betrayal taught me something about family I never expected to learn at my age. If you're watching this, let me know where you're from in the comments and subscribe if you want to hear how I finally stood up for myself when everyone else let me down. I grew up in a modest middle-class family in Lincoln, Nebraska. My parents were hardworking people who instilled in me the values of honesty, loyalty, and family above all else. My father worked at the local paper mill, and my mother was an elementary school teacher. We weren't wealthy, but we had enough, and there was always love in our home. I met Warren during my sophomore year at the University of Nebraska. I was studying to become a teacher following in my mother's footsteps. Warren was in the business program, ambitious and full of dreams about making it big in the financial world. He had this charm that just pulled you in, confident but not arrogant, ambitious, but seemingly grounded. Our first date was at a small coffee shop near campus. Warren spoke passionately about his plans for the future, and I was captivated by his drive and determination. He asked thoughtful questions about my dreams too, and seemed genuinely interested in my goal of teaching children with special needs. It felt like we balanced each other perfectly, his ambition and my nurturing nature. We dated for 3 years before getting married in a small ceremony at my parents' church. We couldn't afford anything extravagant, but it was beautiful in its simplicity. My mother made my dress, and Warren's parents hosted the reception in their backyard. We promised to build a life together based on mutual respect and unwavering support. The early years of our marriage were financially challenging, but emotionally rich. We rented a tiny one-bedroom apartment near the school where I got my first teaching job. Warren started at an entry-level position at a local bank, working long hours to learn the business from the ground up. We budgeted, carefully saved what we could, and dreamed about our future together. 4 years into our marriage, I discovered I was pregnant. Maxwell was born on a snowy February morning, and from the moment I held him, I knew my heart had expanded in ways I never thought possible. Warren was there, through the delivery, his eyes filled with tears as he held our son for the first time. While Warren worked increasingly longer hours, I became Maxwell's primary caregiver. I cut back to part-time teaching to be present for our son's early years. Maxwell was an inquisitive, bright child with Warren's sharp mind, and thankfully, what everyone said was my kind heart. The bond between us was special from the beginning. He would toddle after me around the apartment, helping me fold laundry or prepare dinner, his little face serious with concentration. When Maxwell was 7, Warren received a significant promotion that required us to relocate to St. Louis. It was a difficult decision to leave my part-time teaching position and the community we'd built, but Warren's new salary promised a better life for all of us, especially educational opportunities for Maxwell. With the move came our first home purchase, a 4-bedroom colonial in a good school district. I still remember the day we got the keys. I walked through each room already planning how to make this house our home. I planted a garden in the backyard, chose paint colors for every room, and turned the extra bedroom into a cozy library where Maxwell and I would read together every evening. That house became my project, my pride. Over the next 25 years, I transformed it from a standard suburban home into a warm, inviting space that reflected our family's journey. Family photos lined the staircase wall, marking Maxwell's growth from a gap-toothed child to a handsome young man. The kitchen became the heart of our home, where I taught Maxwell to bake his grandmother's recipes and hosted countless family gatherings. As Warren's career continued to accelerate, our financial situation improved dramatically. He moved from the regional bank to a larger investment firm, then eventually to a prestigious position as senior financial advisor for wealthy clients. Each career step brought more money, but also more time away from home. I noticed the first changes in Warren when Maxwell was in high school. Warren started missing family dinners more frequently, citing client meetings or networking events. When he was home, he seemed distracted, often checking his phone or bringing work with him to the dinner table. I tried to talk to him about it, but he dismissed my concerns, saying his hard work was providing the lifestyle we enjoyed. And our lifestyle had certainly changed. Our vacations became more luxurious European cruises instead of road trips. Our cars were newer, our clothes more expensive. Maxwell attended an elite private high school where he thrived academically and socially. When it came time for college, we could afford to send him to an Ivy League university, though it was actually my family inheritance from my parents that covered a significant portion of his education, something Warren conveniently forgot in later years. Throughout these years of growing prosperity, I remained dedicated to our family life. While I never returned to teaching full-time, I volunteered regularly at local schools and maintained our home as a sanctuary for Warren after his stressful workdays. I coordinated our social calendar, maintained relationships with friends and extended family, and made sure Maxwell never felt the absence of his increasingly distant father too keenly. As Warren and I entered our 50s, the emotional distance between us grew more pronounced. We slept in the same bed, but rarely touched. Our conversations became practical rather than intimate discussions about bills, Maxwell's progress, or social obligations. Warren started traveling more for work, sometimes gone for a week or more at a time. I sensed something was wrong, felt it in the pit of my stomach, but I pushed those feelings away. After all, we had built a life together. We had a beautiful home, a son we were both proud of, and financial security. If Warren was a bit distant, perhaps it was just the stress of his high-pressure career. If our romantic connection had dimmed, wasn't that normal after 3 decades of marriage? Looking back now, I realize I was willfully blind to the warning signs. I didn't want to see what was happening because it would mean confronting the possibility that the life I had devoted myself to was built on an increasingly shaky foundation. The truth came crashing down on an ordinary Tuesday in April. Warren had forgotten his tablet at home, and when I picked it up to put it on his desk, a notification flashed across the screen. It was an email from someone named Audrey with the subject line, "Can't wait for tonight." Something made me open it. Perhaps it was intuition, or perhaps simply the accumulation of all those small doubts I'd been suppressing for years. The message was brief, but unmistakable in its intimacy. "The hotel reservation is confirmed, counting the hours until I can feel your arms around me again." My hands shook as I scrolled through his email, finding dozens of exchanges with this Audrey person, some dating back over a year. There were intimate photos, plans for weekend getaways disguised as business trips, and even discussions about their future together. When Warren came home that evening, I was sitting at the kitchen table with his tablet open in front of me. He stopped in the doorway, and I watched the expressions cross his face, surprise, anger, and then something that chilled me more than anything else, relief. "I suppose we need to talk," he said, setting down his briefcase with deliberate calm. "How long?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "With Audrey, about 18 months. He sat down across from me, maintaining eye contact in a way that seemed almost cruel. "But I've been unhappy for much longer." The conversation that followed was one of the most painful of my life. Warren revealed that Audrey was a 38-year-old investment analyst who had joined his firm 2 years earlier. He spoke about her with an animation I hadn't seen from him in years, her brilliance, her ambition, how she understood his world in ways I never had. "I want a divorce, Lola," he said finally. "I should have asked for one years ago, but I wanted to wait until Maxwell was established in his career." Years ago. The words felt like a physical blow. "You've been planning this for years." Warren's expression hardened. "Our marriage has been over for a long time, You just didn't want to see it." In the days that followed, I discovered just how meticulously Warren had prepared for this moment. He had opened separate bank accounts years earlier, gradually shifting funds away from our joint accounts. He had made investment decisions without consulting me, despite my name being on many of the documents. He had even consulted with divorce attorneys to understand exactly how to protect his assets. When I finally secured my own lawyer, a kind but overworked woman who took my case at a reduced rate, she helped me understand just how disadvantaged I was. Warren had been the primary breadwinner for decades. While I had contributed my inheritance to Maxwell's education and maintained our household, those contributions were difficult to quantify in legal terms. Warren, meanwhile, hired one of the most expensive divorce attorneys in St. Louis. His legal team began an aggressive strategy to minimize my claim to our marital assets. They argued that my contributions to our marriage were minimal compared to Warren's financial provisions. They questioned my decision not to return to full-time work after Maxwell was in school, suggesting I had chosen a life of leisure. The most painful part was watching our social circle divide. Couples we had dined with for years suddenly became unavailable when I called. I learned that Warren had been sharing his version of our marital problems, painting me as clingy and resistant to his success. Many chose his side, whether out of genuine belief or because his connections were valuable in their own careers, I'll never know. Maxwell was in his second year of law school when we told him about the divorce. I called him together with Warren, wanting to present a united front despite our differences. Maxwell seemed shocked, but composed. He asked practical questions about the process and our plans moving forward. "I'm here for both of you," he assured us. "Whatever you need." Those words meant everything to me. At least my son would remain a constant in this upheaval. The divorce proceedings grew increasingly hostile. During a particularly contentious deposition, Warren's attorney brought up a weekend trip I had taken with two female friends years earlier, insinuating inappropriate behavior with no evidence. I watched Warren sit silently as his lawyer attacked my character, making no move to correct the false narrative. That night, I cried until I had no tears left. It wasn't just the end of my marriage I was mourning, but the death of a version of Warren I had believed in, a man who, despite his flaws, would never deliberately hurt me. The next devastating blow came when I learned our family home had been remortgaged without my knowledge. Though my signature appeared on the documents, I had no recollection of signing them. When I mentioned this to my attorney, she explained that challenging it would require an expensive forensic handwriting analysis with no guarantee of success. "But that house is my life," I told her, fighting back tears. "All our memories are there." "I understand," she said gently, "but we need to focus on securing your financial future, not just the sentimental assets." The court's decision, when it finally came, left me reeling. Despite 35 years of marriage, I was awarded only a small percentage of Warren's retirement accounts and investments. The judge accepted the argument that Warren's financial success was primarily due to his own efforts rather than our partnership. Most crushing of all, I couldn't afford to keep our family home. The mortgage payments were beyond my means without Warren's income, and my portion of the settlement wasn't enough to pay it off. I was forced to agree to sell it with the proceeds to be divided 60% to Warren, 40% to me. The day I walked through that house for the final time, touching the walls I had painted, standing in the kitchen, where I had prepared thousands of family meals, saying goodbye to the garden I had nurtured for decades, it felt like I was burying a part of myself. The final divorce settlement left me with approximately $180,000, a sum that might sound substantial until you consider the cost of housing health care for a woman in her 50s, with no employer coverage and the reality of having to rebuild a life from scratch with no recent work experience. As I signed the final papers, Warren sat across from me, expressionless. The man I had loved, supported, and built a life with for over 3 decades looked at me as if I were a business transaction that had finally been completed. "I wish you well, Lola," he said formally as we left the courthouse. I couldn't bring myself to respond. The reality of starting over at 57 hit me hard when I began apartment hunting. I hadn't rented a place since our early marriage, and the current housing market shocked me. Even modest one-bedroom apartments in safe neighborhoods were priced well above what I had budgeted based on my limited settlement. My first week of viewings was disheartening. One apartment had visible mold in the bathroom. Another was located above a bar that the current tenant informed me honestly created a bit of noise until about 2 a.m. A third was clean and reasonably priced, but located in an area where I didn't feel safe walking alone. After each disappointing viewing, I would sit in my car and try not to panic. I had approximately 3 weeks before the new owners would take possession of my former home. The clock was ticking, and I felt increasingly desperate. My friend Patricia, one of the few who had remained steadfastly by my side through the divorce, offered her guest room as a temporary solution. "Stay with us until you find the right place," she insisted over coffee after I'd described yet another depressing apartment viewing. "Frank and I have plenty of space, and it would be nice to have the company." Though grateful, I was reluctant to impose. Patricia and Frank had been married for nearly as long as Warren and I had been. Their comfortable home was filled with photos of their 3 children and growing brood of grandchildren. I worried my presence and the cloud of failure I felt hovering over me would disrupt their happy household. But with few options and time running short, I eventually accepted. I moved a few essential belongings into their guest room and placed the rest in a storage unit, furniture, household items, and boxes of memories I couldn't bear to part with, but had nowhere to keep. Living with Patricia and Frank was comfortable, but uncomfortable at the same time. They were generous hosts who went out of their way to make me feel welcome, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was intruding on their routine. I tried to make myself useful cooking dinner when they had late meetings tidying up common areas, but nothing could change the fact that at 57 I was essentially homeless. After 2 weeks with Patricia and Frank, I decided to reach out to Maxwell. We had spoken regularly throughout the divorce proceedings, and he had seemed supportive if somewhat distant. He was now working at a prestigious law firm in the same city, having graduated near the top of his class. He had recently married Sophia, a woman from a wealthy family, whom he had met during his final year of law school. I called Maxwell on a Sunday afternoon, hoping to catch him at a relaxed moment. He answered on the 3rd ring, his voice warm but slightly distracted. "Mom, good to hear from you. How are you holding up?" I gave him an abbreviated update on my housing search and my temporary arrangement with Patricia and Frank. "That's tough," he said, and I could hear genuine concern in his voice. "Have you thought about looking further out from the city center? The suburbs might be more affordable." "I have," I admitted, "but without a car, the commute would be difficult." My older model sedan had been another casualty of the divorce. It needed expensive repairs I couldn't afford, and I had sold it to a junker for parts. There was a pause on the line, and I heard muffled voices, Maxwell covering the phone to speak to someone else, presumably Sophia. "Listen, Mom," he said when he returned. "Why don't you come over for dinner tomorrow night? We can talk about your situation and maybe come up with some solutions." Relief washed over me. "That would be wonderful, Max. Thank you." The following evening, I took a bus to the upscale downtown area where Maxwell and Sophia had an apartment in a renovated historic building. The doorman announced me, and I rode the elevator to the 12th floor, feeling a mix of gratitude and nervousness. Maxwell greeted me with a hug that felt genuine if somewhat reserved. Sophia stood slightly behind him, offering a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I had met her only a handful of times at their small wedding ceremony and a few holiday gatherings. She was strikingly beautiful, with perfect posture that spoke of a privileged upbringing. "It's good to see you, Lola," she said, using my first name as she always did, despite my gentle suggestions that Mom would be fine. "Maxwell has been worried about you." Their apartment was stunning: high ceilings, exposed brick walls, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The furniture was sleek and modern, clearly expensive. I noticed several pieces of original artwork that must have cost more than my entire settlement. Over a dinner of expertly prepared salmon catered, Sophia mentioned casually, we discussed my situation. Maxwell asked thoughtful questions about my housing search and financial plans. I was honest about my challenges, trying to balance candor with dignity. The market is so much more expensive than when your father and I bought our first place, I explained. And landlords want to see proof of income, which is complicated given my situation. Maxwell nodded sympathetically. It's definitely a tough market right now. He exchanged a glance with Sophia that I couldn't quite interpret. Have you thought about what you'll do for work? Sophia asked, her tone suggesting casual interest, though the question felt pointed. I've started applying for administrative positions at schools, I replied. My teaching certification has expired, but I'm hoping my experience will count for something. As we moved to the living room for coffee, Maxwell cleared his throat. Mom, Sophia and I have been talking, and we have a suggestion. He reached for Sophia's hand. Why don't you stay with us for a while, just until you find a suitable place and get back on your feet? Tears sprung to my eyes. Really? You wouldn't mind? Of course not, Maxwell said, though I noticed Sophia's smile tightened slightly. We have plenty of space, and it makes sense for family to help family during difficult times. I don't want to impose, I began, but Maxwell waved away my concern. It's no imposition. You can move in this weekend if that works for you. The relief was overwhelming. I wouldn't have to continue imposing on Patricia and Frank. I could take my time finding the right apartment and job without the pressure of imminent homelessness. And I would get to spend time with my son during this difficult transition. Thank you both so much, I said, genuinely moved. This means more than you know. The rest of the evening passed pleasantly. Maxwell showed me around their apartment, which included a home office, master suite, and what appeared to be a second bedroom currently set up as a workout space. We can rearrange this, he said, gesturing to the room with the exercise equipment. Make it comfortable for you. That Saturday, Maxwell helped me retrieve my essentials from Patricia's house and the smaller items from my storage unit. Patricia seemed concerned when I told her about the arrangement. Are you sure about this? She asked quietly while Maxwell loaded my suitcases into his car. You're always welcome here if things don't work out. It'll be fine, I assured her, touched by her concern. It'll be good to spend some time with Maxwell, and it's just temporary. When we arrived at Maxwell and Sophia's apartment, Sophia was out at a charity committee meeting, according to Maxwell. He helped me bring my belongings up in the elevator, then showed me to the living room. So, here's your spot, he said, gesturing to the long sectional sofa. It's actually super comfortable. We splurged on the top model when we furnished the place. I stood there, suitcase handles still in my grip, trying to process what he was saying. My spot. Maxwell seemed suddenly uncomfortable. Yeah, for sleeping. I know it's not ideal, but the second bedroom really needs to stay as our home gym. Sophia uses it daily for her Pilates, and I need it for my back issues. But I thought the words wouldn't come. I had clearly misunderstood the entire arrangement. It's just temporary, Mom, Maxwell said quickly. And like I said, this sofa is more comfortable than most beds. Plus, you'll have the bathroom down the hall to yourself, except when we have guests. I forced a smile, not wanting to seem ungrateful. Of course. It's very kind of you both to offer. Great. Maxwell's relief was palpable. I've cleared some space in the hall closet for your clothes, and you can keep your toiletries in the guest bathroom. As I unpacked my meager belongings into the allocated closet space, roughly 1/4 of the small hall closet, I fought back tears. I reminded myself that I was lucky to have a place to stay, that many people had it much worse. But the realization that my son had offered me his couch, rather than rearranging his life in any meaningful way to accommodate me, stung more than I wanted to admit. That night, after Maxwell and Sophia had retired to their master suite, I made up my bed on the sectional. The sheets and blanket Maxwell had provided were high quality, but couldn't disguise the fact that I was sleeping on a sofa in my son's living room at an age when I had expected to be enjoying retirement with my husband in our family home. As I lay there in the dark, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the building, I wondered how my life had unraveled so completely in just a few months. Life on Maxwell and Sophia's couch quickly established its own uncomfortable routine. I would wake early before either of them emerged from their bedroom to fold my bedding and stow it in the storage ottoman. By the time Sophia came out in her silk pajamas and designer robe, all evidence of my sleeping arrangement would be erased. The living room returned to its magazine-worthy appearance. I tried to make myself as unobtrusive as possible. I kept my few belongings meticulously organized in the small space allotted to me. I was careful not to spread out in the bathroom, keeping my toiletries in a single caddy that I could move when needed. I spent most of my days out of the apartment at the library, researching job opportunities at coffee shops, filling out applications, or walking through the city to save on bus fare. Despite my efforts, tensions in the apartment grew steadily. About a week into my stay, I overheard an argument between Maxwell and Sophia when they thought I had gone out. "It was supposed to be temporary, Max," Sophia's voice carried clearly down the hallway. "It's been a week, and she hasn't mentioned any concrete plans." "What do you want me to do?" Maxwell's voice was defensive. "She's my mother. She has nowhere else to go." "Your father offered to help her financially if you asked him. Why haven't you—" That revelation hit me like a physical blow. Warren had offered to help me, and Maxwell had known this, but said nothing. "You know it's complicated," Maxwell replied. "Dad has conditions and Mom is too proud." "Well, your mother's pride is disrupting our lives. I can't even relax in my own living room." I slipped out quietly before they could discover I had overheard. I spent that day walking through the city park, trying to process what I had learned. Warren was apparently willing to offer financial assistance, but with conditions that Maxwell hadn't shared with me. And clearly Sophia resented my presence far more than she had let on. When I returned that evening, both Maxwell and Sophia were carefully polite, but I could feel the underlying tension. I began to notice changes in Maxwell's behavior toward me, subtle at first, then increasingly obvious. His morning greetings became perfunctory. He rarely asked about my job search anymore. When I would mention a potential apartment I'd viewed, he would nod distractedly, without offering any substantial response. In many ways, it reminded me of how Warren had grown distant in our later years of marriage. The same pattern of disengagement, of being physically present but emotionally absent. It broke my heart to see my son, who had once been so emotionally open with me, adopting his father's cold demeanor. About 2 weeks into my stay, I discovered that Maxwell was in regular contact with Warren. I had borrowed Maxwell's laptop to check my email after my phone ran out of battery. When I opened the browser, it automatically loaded his email account. I didn't mean to snoop, but Warren's name in the subject line of the most recent message caught my eye. "Re-update on Mom's situation." Against my better judgment, I clicked on it. The email chain revealed regular updates from Maxwell to Warren about my living situation, my job search, even personal details about how I was coping emotionally. Warren's responses were brief but telling. "Keep me posted. Don't let this go on too long. Remember what we discussed." I closed the laptop feeling sick. Whatever conditions Warren had attached to his offer of financial help, Maxwell was clearly party to them. My son had become my ex-husband's informant. I tried to maintain a positive attitude despite these discoveries. I contributed to the household in the ways I could, preparing dinner, when Sophia was working late at her family's real estate development company, keeping common areas tidy, even picking up groceries with the limited funds I had. My efforts seemed largely unappreciated. One evening, I prepared Warren's favorite pot roast recipe, which had also been Maxwell's favorite, growing up only to have Sophia mention casually that they were mostly plant-based now, as she picked at the meal. Oh, I didn't realize, I said, embarrassed. I can make something else tomorrow. No need, she replied with a tight smile. We usually order in. Less invasion of the kitchen space that way. The invasion of space comment hurt, but I nodded and didn't prepare meals again. As the weeks passed, I continued my housing search with increasing desperation. Each application rejection made me more anxious. Landlords wanted to see proof of stable income, which I didn't have yet despite applying for countless jobs. My settlement money was in a savings account, but without regular income, it would eventually run out. One evening, I overheard a phone conversation that Maxwell was having in his home office while Sophia was out at a girls' night with friends. Yes, Dad, I know. No, she's still here. I've tried to hint about it, but you know how she is. Yes, I remember what Grandpa John left me. But that's for our future. Not for... I understand. I'll try to be more direct. I realized with a sinking heart that Maxwell had inherited money from Warren's father, my former father-in-law, who had passed away 5 years earlier. John had always been kind to me, and I had thought he was fond of me. Apparently, he had left Maxwell a significant sum money that could have easily helped me secure housing, but which Maxwell was keeping for their future. The next revelation came during a dinner with friends of Maxwell and Sophia's 2 other couples in their early 30s, all professionally successful and socially polished. I had offered to make myself scarce that evening, but Maxwell had insisted it was fine for me to join them. Throughout the dinner, I felt like an exhibit the cautionary tale of the middle-aged divorcee. Sophia introduced me as Maxwell's mom who's staying with us for a bit while she figures things out. The sympathy in their eyes made me want to disappear. The conversation inevitably turned to my situation framed as well-meaning interest. So, what are your plans, Lola? Asked one of the women, a corporate attorney named Diane. Will you go back to teaching? Before I could answer, Maxwell jumped in. Mom's teaching certification expired years ago. She's looking at administrative roles, maybe some tutoring. I noticed how he emphasized my lack of current qualifications rather than my decades of experience. It's a challenging job market, I added, trying to maintain my dignity. But I'm exploring several options. My mother went through something similar when my parents divorced, offered Diane's husband, Kevin. She ended up working at my uncle's insurance company. Have you thought about asking family for help with employment? Again, Maxwell answered before I could. Unfortunately, my father's company isn't an option given the circumstances. The implication that I was somehow at fault for the divorce hung in the air. I excused myself shortly after claiming a headache. The most difficult aspect of living with Maxwell and Sophia was witnessing the growing parallel between my son and his father. Maxwell had always been compassionate and emotionally intelligent as a child. I had raised him to express his feelings, to be kind to others, to value relationships above material success. Now I watched as he embraced the cold pragmatism that had characterized Warren's worst traits. Family dinners became increasingly tense affairs. Sophia would discuss her family's various business ventures and social connections, while Maxwell shared updates about his progress at the law firm. I would ask questions trying to stay engaged, but often felt like an outsider looking in on their life rather than a participant. One evening, Sophia mentioned that her mother Grace would be visiting the following weekend. She'll stay in the guest room, Sophia said casually, referring to the home office that converted to a guest room with a pull-out sofa. I was surprised. I thought you needed that space as an office. We do generally, Maxwell explained, not meeting my eyes. But it's set up to convert for actual guests. The distinction between me and actual guests was painfully clear. Grace arrived that Friday, a stylish woman in her early 60s, who greeted me with polite reserve. Unlike my situation, her marriage to Sophia's father remained intact. They lived in separate cities due to his work, but maintained what Sophia described as an ideal modern marriage. The contrast between how Grace was treated and my own situation became increasingly obvious. The guest room had been prepared with fresh flowers, premium linens, and even a small welcome basket. Sophia took time off work to show her mother around the city. Maxwell made dinner reservations at exclusive restaurants that I knew were well beyond my budget. I tried not to feel resentful. Grace was Sophia's mother after all, and it was natural for her to want to make her comfortable. But each special accommodation highlighted the temporary, tenuous nature of my own position in their home. On Sunday evening, after a weekend of feeling increasingly invisible, I overheard excited conversation coming from the kitchen. I had been reading in a corner of the living room, and Maxwell, Sophia, and Grace apparently didn't realize I was still in the apartment. "We've been planning this for months," Sophia was saying, her voice animated with excitement. "It's the perfect location close to downtown, but in that historic district you love." "I still can't believe you did this," Grace replied, sounding emotional. "It's too much, really." "Nonsense," Maxwell chimed in. "We wanted to do this for you, your family." I found myself holding my breath, a sudden hope rising. Were they planning to help me find permanent housing too? Had I misjudged the situation? When they came into the living room and saw me, there was a moment of awkward silence before Sophia's face broke into a wide smile. "Oh, Lola, you're still up. We're having a little celebration. Would you like some champagne?" Too curious to decline, I accepted the glass Maxwell poured for me. "What are we celebrating?" The three exchanged glances before Sophia announced proudly. "We've bought Mom an apartment. We're closing next week, and she'll be able to move in by the end of the month." I nearly choked on my champagne. "An apartment here in the city?" "Yes," Grace said, smiling warmly at her daughter and son-in-law. "These two generous souls decided I needed a pied-à-terre for my frequent visits." "It's in the Westmoreland building," Maxwell added. "That historic conversion project with the original architectural details but completely modern amenities." I knew the building. I had walked past it during my apartment hunt and stopped to admire it. The posted rental prices had been so far beyond my means that I hadn't even bothered to inquire. "It's a 2-bedroom with a den," Sophia continued excitedly, "with a terrace overlooking the park and floor-to-ceiling windows in the living room. The building has a doorman, a fitness center, and even a rooftop garden." I listened in stunned silence as they described the luxury apartment they had purchased for Grace, a woman who already owned a large home in a Chicago suburb, and according to Sophia's previous comments, spent no more than 1 weekend a month in the city. "How wonderful!" I managed, my voice sounding strained even to my own ears. "Congratulations, Grace." Grace beamed. "I'm just overwhelmed by their generosity, and the best part is that I can use it whenever I visit, but they'll also have access to it for entertaining clients or as a retreat when they need a change of scenery." So it wasn't even exclusively for her use, it was also a second property for Maxwell and Sophia. The conversation continued around me, details of furnishings and decorating plans flowing freely. I excused myself as soon as I could, retreating to the bathroom, where I sat on the edge of the tub, trying to process what I had just learned. My son, who had offered me his couch and a quarter of a hall closet, had purchased a luxury apartment for his mother-in-law. The financial resources that could have helped me secure stable housing had been directed toward a part-time residence for Grace, who didn't actually need it. When I emerged, the celebration was still in progress. I slipped quietly back to my corner of the living room, invisible once again. Later that night, after Grace had gone to bed in her dedicated guest room, and Sophia had retired to the master suite, Maxwell stayed up working on his laptop. I approached him cautiously. "Can we talk for a minute?" I asked. He glanced up, looking slightly annoyed at the interruption. "Sure, Mom. What's up?" "I was just wondering." I hesitated, then pressed on. "The apartment for Grace, it's very generous of you." Maxwell's expression shifted subtly. "Sophia wanted to do something special for her mother. Grace has done a lot for us." "I understand," I said carefully. I've been struggling to find affordable housing, and I wondered if maybe you might consider helping me in a similar way. Not something so extravagant, of course, but perhaps assistance with a security deposit or—" "Mom?" Maxwell interrupted, his voice suddenly hard in a way that reminded me painfully of Warren. Your situation is completely different. Grace isn't asking to be taken care of. I'm not asking to be taken care of, I protested. I'm just asking for some help getting back on my feet after the divorce. Maxwell closed his laptop with a decisive snap. A divorce you chose to pursue. The words hit me like a slap. Is that what your father told you, that I chose this? He told me you could have worked things out if you'd been willing to compromise. Instead, you demanded the divorce and now expect everyone else to deal with the consequences. I stared at my son, this stranger, with my child's face. Maxwell, your father had an affair. He hid assets, lied to me for years. He's the one who wanted the divorce. Maxwell's expression didn't change. There are two sides to every story, Mom. Dad said you were difficult during the later years of the marriage, that you made it impossible for him to feel appreciated at home. Warren's narrative had completely overshadowed the truth, even for our son. And now, Maxwell continued, his voice growing colder. You've been here for almost a month with no real progress on finding your own place or securing employment. If you're looking for comfort, maybe you should have thought about that before leaving Dad. Leaving him? I whispered. Is that what you think happened? I think, Maxwell said, standing up, that you need to take more responsibility for your choices instead of expecting Sophia and me to put our lives on hold indefinitely. He walked away before I could respond, leaving me standing alone in the living room, the room that became my bedroom each night, the room I tried to erase my presence from each morning. That night, as I lay on the sectional that suddenly felt harder and less welcoming than before, Maxwell's cruel words echoed in my mind. If you're looking for comfort, maybe you should have thought about that before leaving Dad. My own son believed I had walked away from my marriage by choice. He saw me as a burden, an inconvenience disrupting his perfect life with Sophia. And most painful of all, he had the means to help me, but had chosen instead to buy a luxury apartment for his mother-in-law, a clear statement about who was truly valued in his life. That night was the longest of my life. I lay awake on the sectional sofa, staring at the shadows on the ceiling, Maxwell's words cutting deeper with each passing hour. My own son had essentially told me I deserved my current situation: homelessness, financial insecurity, the humiliation of sleeping on a couch at 57, because I had supposedly chosen to leave his father. By morning, my eyes were swollen from silent tears. But something else had crystallized inside me: determination. I would not continue to subject myself to this environment where I was clearly unwanted and misunderstood. I needed to leave, even if I wasn't sure where I would go. As soon as I heard Maxwell and Sophia's bedroom door close, signaling their departure for their respective offices, I called Patricia. My hands shook as I dialed her number. Patricia, I said, when she answered, my voice breaking despite my efforts to control it. I need to leave Maxwell's, today. What happened? Her concern was immediate. I gave her an abbreviated version of the previous night's conversation and the apartment purchase for Grace. Oh, Lola, Patricia sighed. I'm so sorry. That's beyond hurtful. I can't stay another night, I told her. But I don't know where to go. I hate to ask, but is there any chance? Our guest room is yours for as long as you need it, she interrupted firmly. Frank and I already discussed it after you left. We were worried about you. Relief flooded through me. Thank you. I'll start looking for my own place immediately, I promise. Don't rush, Patricia assured me. Take the time you need to find something suitable. Now, do you need help moving your things? No, I said, glancing at my few belongings. I can manage with a taxi. I want to be gone before they come home. After ending the call, I reached out to another friend, Patricia's sister Julia, whom I'd met briefly during my previous stay. Patricia had mentioned that Julia worked in real estate, and I hoped she might have insights about housing options I hadn't considered. To my surprise, Julia called back within the hour. "Patricia told me about your situation," she said without preamble. "I might have a solution, but it's unconventional. My company just acquired a small apartment building that's scheduled for renovation. The previous tenants have moved out, but the work won't start for about 2 months. The units are dated, but perfectly habitable. Would you be interested in staying in one as a property guardian of sorts? No rent, just utilities in exchange for keeping an eye on the place until renovations begin." It sounded too good to be true. "Really? You could do that?" "Absolutely. It helps us too, having someone on site deters vandalism and squatters. It's a studio apartment, nothing fancy, but it would be private and all yours for at least 8 weeks. By then, you might have found employment and be in a better position to find permanent housing." I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. "Julia, I can't thank you enough. When could I move in?" "Today if you want. I'll meet you there with the keys at noon." After hanging up, I packed my belongings quickly and efficiently. I wrote a letter to Maxwell and Sophia, struggling to find the right words. I wanted to express my hurt without burning bridges completely. He was still my son, despite everything. In the end, I kept it simple. "Maxwell and Sophia, thank you for allowing me to stay these past weeks. I found alternative housing arrangements and have moved my belongings. I understand now that my presence has been a strain on your household, and for that, I apologize. Maxwell, I'm deeply hurt by your misunderstanding of my divorce from your father. When you're ready to hear the full truth, I'll be willing to share it. Until then, I think it's best we take some space. I've left my new contact information below. I love you despite everything. Mom." I placed the letter on the kitchen counter with the spare key they had given me. Looking around the apartment one last time, I felt a complex mix of emotions: sadness for what had been lost, anger at the injustice of it all, but also, surprisingly, a flicker of hope. The taxi took me first to Patricia and Frank's house, where I dropped off most of my belongings, and then to the address Julia had provided. The building was in an older neighborhood, not trendy, but safe and well-maintained. Julia was waiting outside as promised. "It's nothing special," she warned as she led me up to the 3rd floor. "But it's clean and functional." The studio apartment was indeed basic: worn carpet, dated kitchen appliances, white walls in need of fresh paint. But it had good natural light from 2 large windows, a small but serviceable bathroom, and most importantly, it was mine alone. No one would be judging my presence or making me feel like an unwelcome guest. "It's perfect," I told Julia, meaning it. "I can't thank you enough." After Julia left, I sat on the window ledge looking out at my new neighborhood. For the first time since the divorce began, I felt a sense of agency returning. This small, empty apartment represented freedom from Warren's betrayal, from Maxwell's judgment, from Sophia's barely disguised resentment. That first night alone was both terrifying and liberating. The building creaked and settled in ways that startled me. The street noises were unfamiliar, but I slept on a real bed, a simple twin mattress Julia had arranged to have delivered, and woke without the immediate pressure to erase evidence of my existence. The following morning, I called Patricia to update her and thank her again for her support. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Honestly, better than I have in months," I admitted, scared about the future but relieved to have some dignity back. "I'm proud of you," she said simply. Later that day, Julia called with an unexpected offer. "Our office receptionist just gave notice," she told me. "It's entry-level, but it's full-time with benefits. Would you be interested in interviewing?" 2 days later, I sat across from Julia and her business partner Robert in their small but busy real estate office. I wore a skirt suit I had purchased years ago for parent-teacher conferences, slightly outdated but professional. "Your organizational skills and people experience would be valuable," Robert said after reviewing my background. But I want to be transparent, the salary is modest. He named a figure that was indeed modest, but would cover basic expenses once I needed to find permanent housing. Combined with careful budgeting of my remaining settlement, it could work. I'd like to start as soon as possible, I told them. The following Monday, I began my new job. The learning curve was steep. Modern office technology had evolved significantly since I had last worked outside the home. But I was determined to succeed, staying late to practice with the scheduling software and database system. My temporary apartment slowly became more home-like. Patricia and Frank helped me retrieve some essential items from my storage unit. A colleague at the real estate office offered me a gently used armchair they were replacing. Julia brought over dishes and kitchen basics from her own surplus. As I adapted to my new routine work during the day, simple home-cooked meals in the evening, occasional dinners with Patricia and Frank, I found myself thinking less about what I had lost and more about what might lie ahead. About a week after I left Maxwell's apartment, my phone rang with his number. I let it go to voicemail, not yet ready for that conversation. His message was brief and formal. "Mom, I'm calling to make sure you're okay. Please let me know you're safe." I texted back rather than calling, "I'm safe and have housing and employment. I'll reach out when I'm ready to talk." 3 days later, a text from an unknown number appeared on my phone. "Lola, it's Warren. Maxwell told me you left suddenly. We should discuss your situation." I deleted it without responding. The weeks passed, and I settled into my new life. The real estate office was busy, but fulfilling. I enjoyed the interactions with clients and the sense of purpose that came with contributing to a functional workplace. An unexpected development occurred about 3 months into my job. I had been assisting an elderly woman named Helen who was selling her home of 40 years following her husband's death. She was overwhelmed by the process and the real estate terminology. "You explain things so clearly," she told me after I'd walked her through some paperwork. "No one else has taken the time to make sure I understand what I'm signing." I found myself spending extra time with Helen, helping her navigate not just the sale of her home, but also her search for a smaller, more manageable property. Julia noticed my rapport with Helen and other older clients. "You have a gift for this," she told me one afternoon. "Have you ever thought about getting your real estate license? We could use someone who specializes in helping seniors transition to new housing situations." The idea had never occurred to me, but it made perfect sense. I understood firsthand the emotional challenges of leaving a long-term home. I had experienced the confusion and vulnerability of starting over later in life. "I'd need to take courses," I said, considering the idea. "The company would sponsor you," Julia replied. "It's an investment in both our futures." 6 months after leaving Maxwell's couch, I had earned my real estate license and closed my first deal, helping Helen purchase a lovely one-bedroom condominium in a building with services for seniors. My commission, while modest, was the first money I had earned through my own professional efforts in decades. With Julia and Robert's encouragement, I began to develop a specialty in working with recently divorced or widowed seniors, particularly women. I understood their concerns in a way younger agents couldn't. I knew the right questions to ask about accessibility, community resources, and long-term planning. By the 8-month mark, I had saved enough to rent a small but charming one-bedroom apartment in a safe neighborhood. It wasn't luxurious, but every piece of furniture, every decoration reflected my choices. No one could ask me to fold away my existence each morning. Through my work, I had also built a new community, colleagues who respected my contributions, clients who appreciated my service, and a growing circle of friends in similar life situations. I joined a support group for women over 50 navigating divorce, where I both received and offered guidance. One evening, almost a year after I had left Maxwell and Sophia's apartment, my phone rang with Maxwell's number. This time, I answered. "Mom," he said, his voice sounding uncertain. "How are you?" "I'm well," I replied truthfully. "Working as a real estate agent, now specializing in helping people in situations similar to mine." That's great," he said. I'm glad to hear you're doing well. There was an awkward pause before he continued. I was wondering if we could meet for coffee sometime. There are things I'd like to talk about. I considered his request. The anger and hurt had dulled over the months, replaced by a melancholy acceptance of our changed relationship. But I wasn't sure I was ready to reopen that wound. May I ask why now? I inquired. Maxwell sighed. Things have changed. Dad's company is under investigation for financial irregularities. Some of his clients have filed complaints about mismanagement of funds. I wasn't entirely surprised. Warren's ethical flexibility had extended beyond our marriage, it seemed. And, I prompted. And I've had some time to think about things, about what you said in your letter, about there being another side to the divorce story. I agreed to meet him at a cafe near my office the following weekend. When I arrived, I was surprised to find Maxwell alone. I had half expected Sophia to accompany him. He looked different, somehow less polished, more human. There were shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there before. Sophia and I are having problems, he admitted after we'd exchanged awkward greetings. She's staying with her parents for a while. I expressed appropriate concern without pressing for details. It's made me think about marriage differently, Maxwell continued, about how easy it is to only see one perspective. He twisted his coffee cup nervously. Mom, I need to apologize for how I treated you. The things I said that night, they were cruel and unfair. Yes, they were, I agreed, not making it easier for him. Dad told me a very different version of the divorce. He said you'd grown cold, that you were resentful of his success, that you demanded more than he could give. Maxwell looked up, his expression pained. I believed him because it was easier than questioning the father I'd always admired. And now I know about Audrey, and about the other women before her. I know about the financial manipulation. Some of his clients have reached out to me professionally, asking for help understanding what happened to their investments, the stories they tell. He shook his head. They sound just like what you went through. I felt a complex mix of emotions, vindication, sadness for my son's disillusionment, lingering hurt from his betrayal. I'm sorry I didn't listen to you, Maxwell said. And I'm sorry about the apartment for Grace. It was wrong. Yes, I said simply. It was. I'd like to try to make it up to you somehow, he offered. I could help financially or with finding a better place. I held up my hand to stop him. I don't need your financial help anymore, Maxwell. I've built a life for myself that I'm proud of. What I need is for you to understand what happened and to respect the choices I've made. We talked for nearly 2 hours. I shared the full story of the divorce, not to villainize Warren, but to help Maxwell understand the complex reality his father had hidden from him. Maxwell shared his own process of realization and regret. As we prepared to leave, Maxwell asked hesitantly, "Can we try again?" To have a relationship, I mean. I've missed you, Mom. I considered his question carefully. We can try, I told him, but it will have to be different, equal, based on mutual respect. I'd like that, he said softly. We hugged goodbye, and as I watched him walk away, I felt a tentative hope that someday we might rebuild a genuine connection. But I also knew that my happiness and sense of self-worth no longer depended on his approval or inclusion in my life. The journey from that first night on Maxwell's couch to where I stood now had been painful but transformative. I had rediscovered strengths I had forgotten I possessed. I had built new relationships based on genuine care rather than obligation. I had created a life that, while different from what I had planned, was authentically mine. Looking back on that painful year from where I stand now, I realize that sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as devastating losses. When Warren betrayed me and Maxwell rejected me, I lost my identity as a wife and temporarily as a mother. But in that loss, I found something I had surrendered decades earlier. Without even realizing it, my sense of self as an independent, capable woman. In the 18 months since leaving Maxwell's couch, I've built a successful career helping other women navigate life transitions. My client list has grown steadily, and Julia and Robert have made me a junior partner in their firm, recognizing the unique perspective I bring to our business. My little apartment has become a true home. It's not the spacious family house I shared with Warren, but every corner reflects my taste and preferences. There are no compromises here, no considerations of someone else's comfort above my own. The walls are painted in warm colors that I chose. The furniture is arranged for my convenience. The refrigerator contains only foods that I enjoy. The support group I joined eventually evolved into something more a formal network that I now help coordinate for women rebuilding their lives after divorce or widowhood in midlife. We offer not just emotional support, but practical assistance, financial literacy workshops, career counseling, housing resources. I've found deep fulfillment in transforming my painful experience into a source of guidance for others. My relationship with Maxwell remains a work in progress. We meet for dinner once a month, carefully rebuilding trust through honest conversation. He and Sophia have begun marriage counseling, working through the issues that nearly ended their relationship. I've chosen not to inquire too deeply into those problems, maintaining appropriate boundaries that I now recognize were missing in our family dynamics for many years. Warren's legal problems eventually resulted in a settlement with his clients and a suspension of his professional licenses. I feel no satisfaction in his downfall, only a quiet vindication that the truth eventually emerged. When Maxwell asked if I would consider speaking with Warren again, I declined. Some bridges once burned need not be rebuilt. The greatest lesson I've learned through this journey is that family is not just about blood ties or legal connections. True family consists of people who value your presence, respect your dignity, and support your growth. Patricia and Frank have become family to me in ways that transcend friendship. My colleagues and clients form a community that sustains me professionally and personally. The women in my support network understand parts of my experience that even loving friends cannot fully grasp. If you're watching this and facing a similar crossroads in your life, whether through divorce, betrayal, or family rejection, please know that the path forward exists, even when you cannot yet see it. The night I realized my own son valued his mother-in-law's comfort above my basic needs was the darkest moment of my life. But it was also the catalyst that forced me to take control of my future, rather than waiting for others to secure it for me. Today, at 59, I am happier than I was at 49, despite having less material wealth and a very different life than I had planned. I've discovered that dignity cannot be taken from you unless you surrender it, that new beginnings are possible at any age, and that the capacity for resilience lies dormant within us until circumstances demand its awakening. And to Maxwell, who I know may someday watch this, I forgive you, but I will never again make myself small to accommodate anyone else's comfort, not even yours. The love between parent and child should never require one person to sacrifice their dignity for the other's convenience. True love makes room for both people to stand tall. Has anyone else experienced a betrayal from someone you thought would always support you? How did you find the strength to move forward? Leave your story in the comments, and please like and subscribe if this resonated with you. I read every comment and find such strength in this community we're building together. Thank you for listening, and remember, your worth is not determined by how others treat you, but by how you choose to treat yourself.